Hello everyone. So today we will be discussing Python functions, and just like any other language, Python gives you methods you can use to create functions, and there are the concept of both inbuilt functions as well as user-defined functions in Python. Now talking about functions in Python, function, how we define a function is defined as a block of code which performs a specific task, and a function can only be executed when it is called. So no matter you had defined function, it will not execute. You need to call the function with a specific set of parameters or arguments, then only you can be able to execute or run a function. Why we need a function? To increase code readability and to increase the reusability of the code. So if I'm using a Python function, it will have the following parameter. It will have the following syntax. Uh, we use a keyword def to define the function. We specify function name, and within parentheses we will specify an optional list of parameters. Now a function can or cannot have parameters. It totally depends on the type of function and its task which it performs, and accordingly we can specify parameters. Now, once we define this first line is called the signature of the function. Once we define the signature till the closing parenthesis, we have to specify a colon sign, which tells the translator, language translator, that there is a block ahead, which is the function body. Now, this body will contain number of statements which you want to execute according to the task which the function is intended to perform, and it can or it cannot have return expression also. So this is again an optional expression, and return will be the statement which will be executed once you complete throughout the function call, and the entire function has been executed, then it returns to the calling part. So return can have an expression, can have a value which you want to return to the calling part. Now when we are using functions, uh, there could be only one and single return from a function. Now, functions have parameters, and these parameters or arguments are the ones which are required to be processed within the function or the code itself. So, if I am using a function, I had defined certain set of parameters. It is required that I must call the correct number of arguments as per the definition. So, when I'm using a function, I'll be following this format. Now, let me show you a code. For example, let's say I want to define a function. Let me define one for you. So, it will start with def. Let's say my function name is test, and for now, I'm not giving any arguments within my function. So, my function is just to use for printing hello. Now, this is my function body. When I'll execute this, nothing will happen. So it is executed, but nothing has been printed. So in order to print this, I have to call this function. Now when I'll call this function, this part is called function definition, this entire set of line, and this is called calling of the function. So when I'll execute this, it will display hello. So whenever I'll call a function, the control returns to the function definition, and it will execute the line of code which is written inside the function body. So this part is called calling. Now let me define a function which will take two parameters and find their sum. So I defined addition, and these are the set of parameters my addition function will work on. Now I'll be returning a value, for example a plus b. Now again, if I'll execute this, nothing will happen, but because there is no error in my code, there are no errors as such, so it will execute or it will interpret properly. Now I need to call this function. In order to call this, I can do this thing. C equals to, I have to write the name of the function, addition, and then I have to supply two parameters, for example 10 comma 20, and then I'll print the value of C. So when I'll execute this, it says name addition not defined. Okay, I had spelled the name incorrect, so it is addition. So let me execute it again and then execute my calling part. So it says 30. So this is how this function is returning a value. Now you had seen if I am not writing the function name correctly, it will give me an error, function name not defined. Now let me reduce the number of arguments. Now my function has only one argument. If I'll execute this code, it will again raise an error. It says addition missing one required positional argument. I had passed two, or I had defined two, but I am only passing one parameter during the function call. So whenever I am calling a function, exact number of parameters are required. Now let's say I'll pass it as a string, these parameters. So when I'll execute this, it gives me the concatenation of these two strings. So if I'm using a function, it can have parameters. Now it is required that the number of parameters you are passing, the calling part must have exactly the same number of parameters. Now when I am defining this type of functions, the arguments can be of different type in Python. So let's see what all type of arguments Python function supports. So Python supports different type of arguments that can be passed at the time of function call. They are called default arguments, keyword arguments, and they are also known as named arguments. Then we have positional arguments, and the last one is called arbitrary arguments or variable length arguments. And arbitrary arguments are again of two types. They can be non-keyword arbitrary arguments and they can be keyword arbitrary arguments. So let us see one by one how these different type of arguments work. So the one which we had defined, it is called positional arguments. Positional means the number of parameters you are passing and the number of values you are passing during function call. It will be replaced as per the position of the parameters you had supplied. Now, how default works, for example, if I'll write a equals to 10 and let me change the function call here, I'll write 10 only. So, first I need to check this code, then I'll execute this. So, it says 20. Now, what happened? Though in the first attempt, when we had given two arguments, it was asking exactly the same number of arguments. For example, let me do it once again for you. If I'll execute this, it will give me an error missing one required positional argument. That means if I am giving any number of arguments here, they become positional arguments by default and they are required. Required means if you will not supply the same number of arguments during function call, it will generate an error. So what I did, it could be a reason that I don't want to have all the arguments in my program. So I can do this. Now when I'll execute this code and I'll execute this part, it says 22. This means this 10 is being copied to A, and because I had not supplied the second argument, B will now have 12. So this is how default argument works. Now in case of default arguments, we have to consider some of the points. Default argument, all the parameters can be default. For example, if I'll write a equals to 20 and I'll not supply any value here, then it will, sorry, I'll run this and then I'll execute this. So it says 32. So both of these values have been considered as default. Now, if I'll write any value here, it will override the default value. So it will be 14, 2 plus 12, 14. Now, there are certain rules. For example, let's say I had written a equals to 20, comma b. Now my default argument is A according to my program. If I'll execute this code, it will generate an error which says non-default argument follows default argument. That means you cannot have non-default arguments after default arguments. So it is required that if I am using default arguments in my program, they have to be at the end, or if I want, I can have all the arguments taken as default. So I can do this, I can write this, but I cannot change like this. If I'll execute this again, it will generate the same error. Non-default argument follows default arguments. So whenever we are working with default arguments, we write these arguments at the end of the parameter list. All the arguments can be default or they can be at the end. They cannot be in the middle, they cannot be in the start. So we discussed two of the arguments type. One is positional, another is default. Now let's see how we can work with keyword arguments. Now for example, this is my code. I'll execute this. If I'll execute this code and I'll run this, it will print 5. Now how I can make these arguments as keyword arguments? If I'll write C equals to addition, or I'll write D equals to, if I'll write this, A equals sorry, A equals to 10 and B equals to 20, and then I'll print the value of D. If I'll execute this code, it says 30. This means the value of A is being replaced here and B is replaced here. Now A and B are now had become keywords and they are acting as keyword arguments. If I'll change their position, for example, if I'll write B equals to 10 and A equals to 20, let me print the value of A and B here. Print A comma B. See, now A, although I pass the value of A at the end, it is being replaced over here. So it prints A as 20, B as 10. So keyword argument means the name of the argument we had given during the function definition. This is the name. The same name can be given during function call and they can be at any random position. The values will be supplied as per the name of the argument you mentioned in your function. Now, this argument needs to be same. If I'll write C equals to 10 and I'll execute this, it will say it does not got or it got an unexpected keyword argument C. C, because it does not exist during the function definition when we define, it will generate an error. So if I'll execute this, it will run fine. So these are keyword arguments. Now how we will use variable length arguments? Variable length arguments can be used in two types or in two ways. One using non-keyword arguments, another using keyword arguments. How we will do that? Let me show you a function again. I'll define add one. Now variable length argument will have star and the variable name. It will generate a list of elements in the form of tuple and we can then work on this tuple. So my k will become a sequence and I can display this sequence like this. For I in k, print I. Now this is my function. When I'll execute this, it will run fine. Now I need to call this function. Now variable means I can pass as many arguments as I want during the function call. So if I'll write C equals to, because it does not return a value, I will call it directly, add 1. I'll pass some values. Now I'll execute this and see it is displaying the value of all the elements from this function. So k will now become a sequence of 6 elements, and when I'll execute my for loop and print these values, I'll get this. I can do more of the task. For example, I can do this. I can define a variable s, and I can find the sum of all the elements within my sequence. I can write s plus equal to I, and then I can print I after executing my. So when I'll execute this and I'll call this, it will display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 21. I can reduce the number of elements also. If I'll execute this, it will say 1, 2, 3 and the sum. So it can have as many elements as I want, and I can perform any of the task on this function. So variable length argument means my function will have one parameter which will define a sequence, and I can traverse through this sequence. I can pass as many variables as I want in my function. Now the next type is called keyword argument. The one which we already had worked is keyword argument, but it was not of variable length. So I'll define another method, add to. Now keyword argument will require two of the asterisk sign, and this will make a key value pair. So for using key value pairs, I'll be using for key comma value in k dot items. For example, I want to display key. I will write print key. Now I'll execute this code. There are no errors. I'll write add to. Now because it is a key value pair, I have to define a key and a value associated with it. So I'll write name colon ABC comma age colon 12. Now when I'll run this, okay, can you define the error we had in this code? Do you remember how we declare dictionaries in Python? How we create a dictionary? How the syntax of dictionary goes? We have to give name colon ABC, right? Because this name needs to be a variable, a keyword, I have to define equals to sign here, because this is a keyword arbitrary argument. So this name will be taken as a keyword for this value. Now I'll execute this. Let me check. Okay, I'll remove this double quotes because they are arguments. I'll execute this. So because I had printed only key, it will display name and age. If I'll write key comma value and then I'll execute this code, it will say name ABC age 12. So if I'm using arbitrary keyword arguments, I have to specify two asterisks. This will convert my values into a key value pair. I have to specify argument in the form of variable name by and we will supply a value to it. Now I can have as many arguments as I want. I can write this. Now if I'll run this, it will display course also. So these are the different ways in which we can define functions in Python with different type of keywords. Now there is another concept in Python which is called lambda function. and we use lambda function to perform or to specify a function without a name. It is often called anonymous function. So how we will define that? For example, if I'll write c equals to, whenever we are using lambda function, we will be using a keyword which is called lambda. A lambda function is a one line function, a single function. It can have as many argument as it you can specify, and we can process these arguments. Now, a lambda function never returns a value. So if I'll write print c 10 comma 20 and I'll execute this code, see it prints 30. So a lambda function is defined with two parameters and it will perform the addition of these parameters, and I pass this entire function into a variable c. Now c will now behave as a function, and when I'll call this c with the number of arguments I specified here, it will display the required processing. So we can define a lambda function to perform this type of task. Now, lambda functions can be used in other ways also. We can use lambda functions for defining methods or to define methods in relation to a map, reduce, and filter function. So, let us see how we can define a lambda function to perform map, reduce, and filter option. Now, in order to do that, now what exactly map function is? A map function is used to perform a given task on a sequence of n number of elements, and these n number of elements will be executed based on the task which we had supplied. So, how we will do that? Let me give you an example for that. Now, in order to use that, let me find out an example. For example, I want to find the square of a number. Square means I want an expression, an entire list, and I want to do a double of all the elements in my list. So, how I will do that? I'll write a function, for example, twice equals to lambda. Now I want to multiply it by, because I want twice of this variable. So if I'll write this and I'll execute my code for a value. Because I defined a lambda function twice, now I'll be calling it using map. So I will define a list, for example, 1, 2, L equals to 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now I want to perform the task. I'll do this. A equals to map. Now map will have two parameters. One is the function which you want to perform. I want to do it using twice, and then the sequence. Then I'll display A. So let me execute this code. When I'll simply display A, it will define a map task. Now what I will do, I'll be printing the value of A. So this is an object, it will execute this, it will perform the twice of the element, and if I'll print L, L remains the same. So for example, let me display the values which are being multiplied by 2 if I want to display that. How we will display? Let me print the value of A one by one. says mapped. Let me do this. So it says 2. Because it returns a map object, we need to convert it into list type. Now if I'll simply print A, see, it will show the double of all the, it will give the twice of all the elements. So 1 multiply 2 is 2, 2 multiply 2 is 4, 2 multiply 3 is 6, 2 multiply 4 is 8. So this is how lambda functions can be used along with map function, and they will help us to reduce the lines of code. So these are the different function types we can use in Python in order to perform different tasks. Now in the next lecture we'll be working on functions. So thank you for now. भले रिकॉर्ड ही नहीं हुआ. कैसे रिकॉर्ड बंद करूँ इससे? How to record? How to stop screen recording in PowerPoint? Windows.